Today we're going to be talking about, this is the enterprise software part of the session number 2. I'm going to be talking about what's new and cooking in KNIME Server. And we have 2 other talks, one from Seagate, one from Siemens. Really looking forward to both of them. They look like really good talks, but we'll get to those in just a minute. I want to give a little bit of an overview of KNIME Server for those of you who haven't used it or haven't heard of it. So if we look at the overall KNIME software ecosystem, within there we have, of course, KNIME Analytics Platform. This is what we've been talking about a lot today. You've seen examples of people using it. But we also have KNIME Server. So when would you use KNIME Server? If you needed to collaborate within a data science team, if you want to do automation, if you want to be able to invoke workflows through a REST interface, those are all the times where you would use KNIME Server. We're also I have started work on KNIME Hub, and you can see KNIME Hub is going to be used kind of as a way to glue Analytics Platform and Server together even more than they are today. So we talked about it a little bit, collaboration. Server Analytics Platform also integrates with Workflow Hub, as we saw earlier today. You can kind of drag and drop components over and workflows. KNIME Server has a shared repository. In that repository, you can put workflows, you can put components, data, you can store models there. And that allows your whole team then to be able to, if I upload a workflow to the KNIME Server, you're on my team, you can see it, you can play with it, you can run it, you can actually download it yourself, edit it, push it back up, and there it would be versioned. So I'd be able to see what changes you made, what changes I made, and keep track of it. So working in that team environment. For automation, you can actually schedule workflows, so you can schedule them. And actually, we have some new features in Scheduler that are very nice. We can talk about that here in just a minute. Distributed executors. So right now, when you run, this is a feature that's available today. When you run the KNIME Server, usually there's an executor running on the same machine. And the executor is the piece of software that actually runs workflows for the server. Those can now be distributed to multiple machines. And that just gives you the capability of concurrently running more jobs, of being able to scale out as far as the amount of horsepower that you have, CPU, memory, all those things. You don't have to just scale up your single machine like you did before. And this is one of my favorite new features is Remote Workflow Editor. So if you have a workflow on the server, you want to actually run it and kind of edit it in place instead of having to download it back into the KNIME Analytics Platform. That's fully supported now. And I'll actually do a demo of that here in just a minute. As far as managing, of course, you can, we'll offer security. We have some new options on security within KNIME Server that we'll talk about for the next release that are coming up. Configuration, as far as you can actually use Server to manage configurations of your KNIME Analytics Platform. That's really nice in larger enterprises because if you have a new JDBC driver comes out, you don't have to have 200 people go download it by themselves and install it and maybe get the wrong version or whatever. You can actually control all that now through the server, and that's called client customizations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. As far as deployment, we talked about Web Portal some today already. That's where you can actually build these guided analytic applications. And we have a session tomorrow morning at 9 that's going to go into that in a lot more detail. Every workflow that you publish to the server automatically gets a REST API. It gets an API endpoint. And with that, you can integrate with web applications, mobile apps, cloud-based services. So it just really opens up the world of integration with workflows. And so what we see a lot of times is people will use KNIME, of course, to build a model. Once they've tested it and they're really happy with it, they want to put it into production, they can just build another workflow that wraps that model, that applies it. So it's going to take some data in as input that can be passed through the REST interface. It's going to run the workflow, server will run the workflow, capture the output of the workflow, and then return that as a payload within the REST request. And so where we see people using that, for example, let's say you want to build some sort of scoring model that's going to score people according to some attributes that you pass in. You can build that workflow, deploy it to the server, make a REST call into it, pass those attributes, and then you'll get an answer back, yes or no, or maybe some numerical value, whatever it may be. And then your web application or some other application that you're integrating with KNIME can then use that information to make decisions. Okay, there are 3 KNIME Server editions. And by that, we mean we call them server large, medium, and small. It doesn't have anything to do with how much data they can process or how big a server you can run it on. It's really more about the features that are available. So server large is really meant for enterprise-level customers. It includes all the features available within KNIME Server. Server medium is targeted more for like smaller organizations, maybe department-level organizations within an enterprise. And then server small, we see a lot of smaller teams or maybe kind of startup companies start there just to kind of get started at kind of a lower price level. All of this is available online. If you go to this URL within the KNIME website, you can see the full matrix of all the features and the costs there. Okay, so what's new in KNIME Server? And sometimes you'll hear us say, like, what's new and what's cooking? And when we talk about what's new, we're talking about like what features are in KNIME Server now that are kind of fairly new, right? Maybe they were in the last version that just came out. When we talk about what's cooking, we mean like what's coming up next. Hopefully in the next release, but maybe a release after that. But just kind of want to keep you up to date with what's going on. Okay, KNIME Server can run on-premise, can run in cloud. We have Analytics Platform and KNIME Server, both in AWS and Azure Marketplaces. We get a lot of questions about Google Cloud Platform. We don't have it, KNIME Server or Analytics Platform in their marketplace yet. We do have plans for doing that at some point. But of course, you can run it there. We have customers who actually run KNIME Server in Google Cloud Platform. AWS Marketplace Updates. This year we added, or recently we added KNIME Server Small a free trial of KNIME Server Small within AWS. So if you go in, you sign into your AWS account, you go to Marketplace, you can buy KNIME Server Small, you'll get it 30 days for free. And same thing with KNIME Analytics Platform. On the Azure Marketplace, before we only had BYOL, or bring your own license version. Now we have a pay-as-you-go model for KNIME Server also within Azure. Okay, one of the big features that we added to KNIME Server this past year is called distributed executors. I mentioned that earlier. And the idea there is that it was within KNIME Server, like if you look on the left-hand side, left-hand side, you see workflows. That would be the KNIME Server with the workflow repository. And then you can have multiple KNIME executors running on different machines. And the idea there is that you can add more executors to just offload jobs to different machines. So you're not just piling on one machine. And the idea there also is that within the cloud that you can also make that elastic. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. So the great thing about having these distributed executors is that you can also do what we call workflow pinning. And with workflow pinning, what you can do is you can create these labels, and these labels such as standard and GPU, right? I just picked an example. I can then label KNIME executors with that. So now you've kind of created these executor groups. So I have a standard executor group, and I have a GPU executor group, and the GPU executor group, I guess, would have GPUs on it. And so maybe I only want to send jobs to it that will really actually utilize the GPUs. And so when I submit a workflow to KNIME Server to execute, I can then tell it which label I wanted to use. And by doing that, it will be routed to the correct executor group. So for example, I have a deep learning job I want to run. I want to use GPUs because it will run much faster. So then I'll label that job with GPU. And then the server will make sure that it gets routed to a distributed executor that has GPU capabilities. Right? So, and those labels are totally made up. You can make them whatever you want them to be. Okay, the REST API for workflows has been available for quite a while. So I just wanted to kind of demonstrate that. You can do show API definition within the server, and you get a Swagger page. And the Swagger page, if you're not familiar with OpenAPI or Swagger, it's a really great way of kind of self-documenting a REST API. So for example, every workflow has an execution method that can be called. It's a post method. You can actually try it out within the Swagger page. So it's a really powerful way of sharing APIs with people who know nothing about KNIME. So if someone in IT needs to integrate a workflow that you've built using a REST API, you just point them to this URL, and they don't have to know anything about KNIME. They get the full kind of definition of what that API is. All right, we just recently rebuilt most of the API within, all the API within Server to support REST. And so now you can actually get the Swagger page for the REST API for Server also. This is really nice because you may want to do some things to automate integration with Server. For example, maybe you want to be able to deploy workflows to Server automatically. You can use this REST API then to do that. You can do it. You can use that to schedule jobs. You can use it to look at the status of jobs. We've actually seen customers build kind of a whole dashboard around KNIME Server using this REST API. And again, having it in Swagger just makes it really easy for you to use. So another new feature that's really focused on performance is called job pools. And the idea with job pools, if you look at the way KNIME Server works, when a REST call comes into KNIME Server will then work with the executor to load the workflow into memory, and then invoke the workflow, and then grab the data out of it, return that as part of the REST call. Of course, now you have that loading time that's going to add to your latency. And as a lot of jobs are being run, things that are in memory will get kind of cached out. So with job pools, what that does is you can actually then set up a job pool. For example, we've set up a job pool with 4 jobs in it. Those workflows will get loaded up automatically, and they will stay preloaded and ready to go. And so that cuts down on the latency quite a bit when you're making calls, REST calls into KNIME Server. Why would you care? If you have an application maybe that's more consumer-facing, a mobile application like we talked about earlier, right? You don't want to wait several seconds for a call, for example, because a workflow got paged out and now has to get reloaded. You want those workflows to be loaded and ready to go, and that way you can keep your several milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, whatever it is, load time, latency for those calls. Okay, so I talked about earlier about server-managed customizations. And what this is about is, if you have a large group of people using KNIME Analytics platform, they could have different settings. They could have different ways that they want to use KNIME Server. And the idea with this is that you can now manage all of that through. The idea is that you can now manage all of that through KNIME Server. And if we look at how this is set up, the idea is like you have different groups within your company, maybe marketing, finance, R&D. Each group has different OS systems that they use, maybe different technologies that they use, like Python and R versus maybe Oracle or Hive and Spark for big data. And each of those groups has kind of different needs of the analytics platform on the desktop. This is really great. Using this customization through Server is great when you want to roll out changes. Like I was saying earlier, a new JDBC driver is available, or maybe you start using a new database. You then just have to load the driver on the server, update your profile. Anybody logs into AP that uses that profile would automatically get these updates. Okay, and the way that you do it is on KNIME Server. You would create what's called client profiles. And you create each of those profiles within the KNIME Server, and then you put the information, whether it be the KNIME INI, preferences, or JDBC drivers. All of those pieces can go within that profile. As a KNIME application analytics platform user, I would go to KNIME preferences, go to customization profiles, connect to my KNIME Server that's actually managing the profiles, and then I'll get a list of profiles that are available to me. For example, in this one, we have a default profile, a Windows profile, and a Linux profile. So in this case, the user is a Windows user, but we also have a default profile that every user should select. So you can select multiple profiles, and then KNIME will kind of manage the overlap between all of those. Okay, scheduler enhancements, time frame. So we got this request a lot. The idea is that when you schedule a job, you can say which days of the week you want it to run. Maybe you only want to run on business days, what days of the month. Maybe at the end of the month you don't want it to run because you're doing end-of-month processing, whatever that may be. And then also now you can do time frames. And the idea with time frames is this is a new tab on the scheduler dialog. You just click plus, and then you can add these time ranges. For example, I put 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. That means jobs would only run between that time frame. I added another one, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. So jobs will only run within those 2 time frames. And so this really allows you to get down to a pretty granular level when you want jobs to be able to run. Normally, they just run the full 24 hours. So if I say run a job every hour, forever, every hour it's going to run, unless I can add these time ranges, and I can at least specify when I want it to run. So that way it doesn't run maybe at busy times or whatever the constraint may be around why you don't want it to run during whatever times. Okay, email notifications is another one. We've always had email notifications, but now you can actually specify, do you want the email on success or on failure or both? It's up to you to specify. And that's really nice because a lot of times you don't want them on failures. Maybe you just want to know when it worked. And now you can specify that at this level. All right, remote workflow editor. Again, this allows you to be logged into the server through your KNIME Analytics platform. And then you can actually then remotely edit a workflow. You can actually run it. And while it's running, you can do all the things that you can do, well, most of the things that you can do while you're remote. This is really nice because if you have some, maybe a database or maybe your big data environment is only connected to your server, not to your analytics platform on your desktop, this allows you to access those resources and edit it and maybe do some debugging on the server, but while you're using your desktop to do it. So you're using the KNIME Analytics platform desktop, but it looks like you're editing locally, but you're actually editing remotely. Okay, I was going to do a quick demo. I'm kind of running out of time. Let me get through the slides, and I'll try to come back to the demo. All right, what's cooking? So what's coming up soon? KNIME Server Large for AWS Marketplace. This is with distributed executors, as we talked about before. With an auto-scaling group, so it can scale up, it can scale down, meaning it's elastic scaling. And the idea there is that if normally you maybe only need 2 executors, that gives you plenty of power, except every now and then you need a little bit more, or maybe you need a lot more. With this kind of setup, you can have that more when you need it. Auto-scaling can be done manually, it can be done automatically based on some sort of metrics that we put in place, maybe based on utilization. And so that way you can scale up and scale down according to your load. A few other scheduling enhancements that are coming are call workflow action. And the idea here is that after a scheduled workflow runs, once it's completed, you can then actually run another workflow. And you can run it if the workflow worked or if it failed. And this way you can kind of do a second orchestration step off of that scheduled job. Or maybe you have a workflow that's going to handle the error. So that way, if the workflow did fail, that was scheduled, the handle error workflow would get run. And it can handle the error, maybe do some notification, whatever that may be. And it's up to you on how many workflows you want to run. They all have to be on the same server, though. Okay, one other schedule enhancement is configuration options. So if you build a workflow, we talked about web portal a lot and interactions with users. If you build a workflow that has some of these configurations that a user would normally input, you can actually input those values for those configuration options as part of scheduling the job. And that way, every time that job runs off of that schedule, those values would be passed in. For example, the workflow I was working with actually connected to a database. And as part of that connection, the user built into the workflow these configuration nodes to say, what's your account name and what's your password. Now normally, when you're running a schedule, of course, there's no user to sit there and type that information in. And so the idea here is that these configuration options can be overridden at the time that you schedule the job. And then every time the job runs on that schedule, those values would be passed in. Okay, a few other enhancements. Right now, we use LDAP and AD for authentication support. Also, there's a locally managed option within KNIME Server. We're also adding OAuth support. And that'll allow you, OAuth is an open standard for token-based authentication and authorization. And so this will be another option for you to use. Really opens it up so that, more of one sign-on capability and stayed logged in once you log in to that. So yeah, just trying to make it easier to integrate with IT groups and make it easier for users to use the server. We're also working on a facelift for web portal, and this will be talked about quite a bit more in the later session. That's the one at 9 a.m. tomorrow. What's new and cooking in KNIME web portal. All right, KNIME Hub. So we talked a lot about KNIME Hub today. We didn't really talk too much about some new features that we're adding in it. KNIME Hub is seen as really a community building system that you can log into. You can see other workflows. You can do searches, all the things that we talked about earlier. But we did talk a little bit about private team spaces. And so the idea there is that you can have you have your own private space in Hub today, but you can't share it with anyone. But this is supposed to be a collaboration platform, right? So we're going to create private team spaces where I can create a team space and I can invite anybody into this space that I want to. Once you're in that space, you can see any workflows that I upload. I can see your workflows, components, all those things can be shared. Well, that's great. But the next step is now that I have a team there, I want to start collaborating with that team. And so we'll start adding collaboration where you can do versioning within the Hub. You can also do change management. And by change management, we mean if I'm working on a workflow, you start working on the same workflow, there's a way for us to kind of work that out. Whose changes get saved, make sure that you don't overwrite my changes, I don't overwrite yours, and we can kind of keep track with what everybody's doing. And so that'll be part of that collaboration within KNIME Hub. And then also the next logical thing to add is execution, both ad hoc, which you have today on KNIME Server, but also scheduled execution. And then we also have a prototype of what we call a scalable scoring service. This is by scoring we mean it's a way of calling a workflow with a REST API and passing in some data, and it gives you an answer back. So any workflow that does that could be part of this. And it's scalable in the sense that it doesn't provide all of the capabilities of KNIME Server, so there's no repository. It really is just about that fast execution. It's containerized. It can scale out to handle hundreds of requests a second. That will be part of that execution also. So KNIME Hub is kind of becoming a way of bringing KNIME Analytics Platform and KNIME Server together, and it will continue to grow. And basically KNIME Server and KNIME Hub will become, all the features of KNIME Server will be available within KNIME Hub also as we move forward. Okay, I went through that really fast to get everybody caught up after lunch. All right, so again, if you want to learn more, there's sessions, life sciences and other data science session. Within that will be one on what's new in cooking and web portal. So hope you guys will enjoy that session. And before I have just a couple of minutes, I'm going to see if I can do this demo. So I really want to show off the workflow editing. All right, so I have a server here that I'm connected to within KNIME AP. If you've never done this before, it's basically like a mount point. And so this mount point is connected to a server that happens to be running on the same laptop. I have a workflow here that I want to be able to execute remotely, so I can open it as a new job on server. Okay, and it opens up, and the only difference that you'll see is this little purple banner, whatever color that is, banner, that shows you that, hey, you're remote editing this on KNIME Server, just so you know the difference, right? Okay, I can actually run it. Maybe I'll just run one of these. So again, very similar kind of usage model that you would have for editing something locally. I can look at the output of the data. And then I can't remember what I set for my partitioning, so let me take a look at that. That's kind of high, so let me turn it down just a little bit. Click OK, it resets. I'll rerun it again. And let me just run the whole thing. And again, all that's happening on the server. None of that is running locally. So if I had any server resources that I need to access that I could only access on the server, that would be great. This would be an easy way to debug that. You also have access to views. So I can actually look at the output of the data, of the node, output data of the node. All right, and we talk a lot about components. So I actually built a workflow that uses a component. This is a component that's using Python to interface with an Amazon service that I want to work with. And I'm going to just take that, and I'm going to turn it into a shared component. I'm going to share it on the server. Oh, no. Hang on. I think it timed out while I was at lunch. Okay, now I'm going to share this component. OK, now if I go into the server in my directory, and I can see that I have this component there. And now that it's in server, and again, server is used for collaboration, right? So other users are logging in. They see that component, and they go, that looks really cool. I think I'll use it. I just have to drag it onto my canvas. And now, just like a node that you dragged on the canvas, you can use it. It has configuration items that you can set. Just like a node, it has documentation. So it's just a really great way of being able to build pieces that are reusable, that other people can use, and then using KNIME Server to get it out into the community so that they can reuse them, drag and drop them onto their canvas. If new versions become available, you get notified about it. So yeah, just a great way of reusing KNIME. We heard a lot about, this morning about people, with hundreds of users using KNIME. So that's a great way to share those capabilities.